Good evening, everybody. This is Today with Tim, and I'm Tim coming at you from the Midwest Hub in Sterling, Illinois. Today is July 14th, 2021. And I'm with my good friend Dusty Rhodes. How you doing, Dusty?
Pretty good.
Glad to be with you tonight. Yeah, having a drink and just discussing life. I met Dusty last month in June 2nd, 2021. It was a Saturday night, and I did my first podcast of 2021. As you all know, last year I started podcasting with my introduction with the EPRN.US network. And into March, COVID was going on. I was going to be going to podcast school, and so I call it work in progress. So, folks, before this podcast, this second podcast of 2021 airs, you're going to see mistakes and you're going to see flaws. I myself with this, and this is where it's going to get good. And this is where it's going to get fun. I just screwed up, by the way, saying the wrong city on this podcast. So I'm going to admit my flaw, right, Dusty?
Yep.
Yeah. And you're like, I've said, okay, this is going to be take 3. Everybody, life is life, and we got a lot of life left to live. A lot of interesting and intense stuff is going on right now, as we know, from 2020 to 2021. Dusty, I met you last month, and when I met you in June, it was exactly 3 months. You said you lost your father. And what's going to be nice about starting out with the shows is last year was work in progress, but after being with you before going live tonight, I think I've come up with something that I'm going to pursue now, and we'll get to that in a few moments. And about, kind of this is starting out about our fathers.
Sure.
What happened to you in March? And as a matter of fact, your birthday's March 14th. I'm March 24th, so we're kind of right on our tips. Pisces.
Yep.
My mom is Pisces, and I'm an Aries.
Mm-hmm.
So great. Tell me, what happened on March 14th of this year, 2021?
So this is my 45th birthday, and I woke up to a voicemail actually from my sister that my dad had passed. He'd been in the hospital for, I think, like 3 weeks. He'd been fighting cancer, and then he'd gotten pretty bad sick, and of course it was documented as COVID, but whatever it was. But regardless, all the COVID protocols were in place at that time. So unfortunately, we weren't able to go up and see him. But
sorry about that.
Yeah. No, and it was sad. He was able to call us though. We talked to him a few times, but he had a lot of respiratory problems. His lung collapsed a couple of times while he was in there. So even talking to him on the phone was a challenge. Could only talk for a couple minutes here and there, and then he'd have to get off and try and rest up. So. It was kind of to a point where it was, without sounding morbid, but it was best that he went because he was in really, really bad shape. Outside of...
When did, not to interrupt you, when was he diagnosed with this lung problem, and when you found out that he had COVID?
When they took him in, he just woke up one day and he was like bad sick and like couldn't even get out of bed. But it's hard to say because, doing his therapies and stuff for the cancer, there was a lot of times that he was bad weak and was challenged getting out of bed and things like that physically. So, but he just gotten a really bad chest cold and my understanding was he was basically like pinned. He kind of went off the side of the bed between the bed and the wall, and he couldn't get out of there. My mom's not physically capable of, helping him out and everything. And luckily, my sister was there. And they called an ambulance. He went to the hospital by ambulance. So,
right.
Yeah, he was in pretty rough shape.
And this was in January?
This would have been probably February.
In February.
Yeah, like the end of February, because like I said, he was in there for about 3 weeks before he actually passed. So, maybe around mid-February, late February.
And so you and your mom and I understand now you have a daughter, you have a 4-year-old, and you have a 19-year-old.
Correct.
And your parents, your mother and father, are still together. Okay, so when we first talked, we did discuss COVID. Now I've been at my podcasting now for a year, starting in March. So this is kind of the development, and I'm so glad, and I want you to be actually my number one person moving forward as I develop into my show. We have a lot we could create, kind of like writing history right now. That's in our conversation before this interview with Dusty. I let him know my nervousness and as far as developing a show. Today with Tim just kind of came to me a year ago, and in the start of a pandemic. So I want you to know, folks, that moving forward, anything that I air is not about, look at me. This is something for our kids. This is something for the future, and this is something spiritual from the Creator, from the Lord. Talent, understanding, emotions, feelings, anything to do with life. This is real time, real podcast. And so anyway, Dusty, saying that, back to your situation with your father, how touching, because I will close tonight with kind of our fathers, and we're starting with yours, and I'll kind of, in the podcast, a couple things that relates back to our past interview. There's so much. So anyway, you experienced this coming up in February, leading you were with him, and going now. Your birthday is coming up March 14th, 2021. You say you lost your father.
Yeah. My dad and I weren't ever what I would say close. We had a good mutual respect for each other. My dad was a complicated man. I'll just kind of say that. So we just had completely different interests. He was kind of a gearhead. He liked messing around with cars and stuff like that.
Right,
I was an athlete, and he didn't know the difference from a home run and a touchdown. But I can always remember being at my games and stuff as a kid, growing up. Like, he didn't know what the heck was going on, but he still would show up to support me,
Exactly, I understand.
So I never heard the words "I love you" from my dad a whole lot, In fact, as a kid, like growing up, I don't recall him ever saying it until I was 14. I was a freshman in high school when he shipped off for Desert Storm. So that was a pretty challenging time. And then, when he got back, I heard it again. And then I don't remember hearing it again until I was like 19 when I went through some stuff in life. And I ended up in the hospital for a while. And, he'd come up to visit me, and he told me he loved me. And so, I always knew my dad loved me. We just weren't ever really close.
That's okay. And that's how it was for
Yeah.
me, too. And we'll get to that at another time. I want to start this out, kind of because you're doing my show. I want this not to be kind of the start of this about me. I kind of wanted to hear your story.
Sure.
Yeah. And I know this is hard, Dusty, and this is fine. This is totally fine. It's an emotional, but maybe it's meant to be, because these are the things we keep in. We don't want to share, and I'm find it to be wonderful that you're sharing your story with me. So you're in February, and things with your father are going. So you're coming into March 2021.
I would get a phone call from him every couple of days or every day. Talk to him for a couple minutes and get what I could out of him. It was nice to at least hear his voice, even though we couldn't go in and see him and everything. But it's weird because my dad had been through so much. Like, there was never an anticipation he was actually going to die. It's like he's going to bounce back from this. My dad's, tough as nails.
So he got the virus, and somewhere in January he was diagnosed.
Yeah, must have been sometime, I would guess probably early February that he got it, because by the end of February is when he was actually in hospital. I don't
According
know
to
the
the
exact
time frame when this
I don't know
started
what the
in
incubation
January.
period
Wow,
is,
yes.
But regardless of everything, of course, when he went in, we didn't know what it was. We just thought it was like a respiratory infection or something like that. They just gave him some antibiotics, and but the whole thought of my dad was actually not going to come back out of the hospital that wasn't even in anybody's mind. It was just so surreal to get that call and hear that he died. But honestly, after like the second week or so, it really did start creeping in at least my mind that this might not be good. Again, because his immune system was so low from the cancer treatments and all that. But even so, it's like you don't expect it. It's I've seen him come back from so much worse, and there we are.
Right. And so, how did he pass away? It was it peaceful? I mean, this was March 14th.
Mm-hmm.
We're at July 4th. Today, 2021. I have an anniversary of a business partner of mine passed away. It's been 13 years today. Say a prayer and remembrance to Wayne Lyons. He was a horticulture. Passed away on July 14th. So today is kind of a day of remembrance for me, Dusty. It's interesting how dates and times can hit people at certain times, and so I guess what I would say is there's no real details. He passed away on your birthday 3 years ago. My best friend here in Rock Falls, where we are tonight, Rock Falls, his mom passed away on his birthday too. Another story, June 27th, 2018, and this was just this past month too. So it's interesting how certain dates and times and how fast the time does go, and boy does time go fast, folks. You all know that, and we're all caught up in our lives and our different things. But yes, that's when I started my podcast in COVID the pandemic, 2020, and this led into 2021 for you all through last year. That's when I did my interview with the mayor about this in my introduction with the EPRN.US, and then I kind of lay low for a while, and then here I go, not starting something like this and finishing college. Of course, I had my graduation. Now we had a year after at Sauk Valley Community College, which had, as many of you saw, was beautiful. The people that spoke. There's a lady there that's got a lot of history in Illinois. It's a teacher there. I can't think of her name right now, but she spoke. Just gave a beautiful message. All the people there looking at the icon, we call them icons, Dusty, that are people that, as a matter of fact, my pastor of Firehouse Ministries, he was giving a sermon just this past Sunday. We lost somebody, 59 years of age, speaking about she had cancer, and these subjects in death and disease and things that we as people, as families, these are hard, especially people that share their stories live, online, or on a TV interview. So what Dusty just shared to me is very touching, and I'll tell him at the end of this podcast kind of this is about his father from the beginning, sharing his stories, losing his father on his birthday, and mine is about kind of losing mine, and what's giving me the inspiration moving forward to create a show and do future podcasts on current events. And this is actually a fresh start for me, Dusty. So moving forward, I met you in June. So overall, are you at peace? Are you at peace with it before we move on into?
I am.
Your mom?
My mom, she's okay. They've been married. This would have been their 50th anniversary this year. 50. Yeah. So 49 years.
It's kind of like my grandparents, 49 years. It's interesting how just meeting you and having this conversation. I'm thinking of dates and times and how this is kind of, I think, a spiritual new meeting and something good to come. Dusty, in our last interview, and I, like I say, my prayers with you. I birthday and to lose your dad. I can only. I just
You,
wanted. I
you
just want
know,
to say thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
I wanted to start out and just say, hey,
people have asked me about that. You know, what's it like? Because every year you have your birthday. You know, it's going to be remembering. You know, your dad died. And it doesn't matter the date because you're going to remember that anyways, right? But to me,
still,
what gave me peace about those, I like to think that my dad held out for one more day. He's like, you know, I like to think that he thought, you know, tomorrow's his birthday. I just got to make it till tomorrow. I want to see him have one more birthday. You know, that's the way I like to look at it. I don't know. It's a double-edged sword with it. It's kind
double-edged sword. Um, uh, quickly, do you remember your last words that either you said to him or he said to you, or no?
Yeah, love you, pops. That's last time I talked to him was on the phone, and I always ended with "love you, pops," and he said "I love
And
you
you
too."
were able to do that.
Yeah, he said "I love you too." So, I'm at peace with it. I don't feel there was anything between us that ever went unsaid. You know, I had a typical father-son relationship with him. That back when I was like 17, we almost came to blows in an argument. You know, my mom got in between us. Didn't talk for about a year. Yeah, but we still always loved each other, right? You know,
And he
got
served
past
in
that.
Desert Storm.
He was in Vietnam and Desert Storm. Yeah.
When did he go to this Desert Storm?
That was in 1990 when Hussein had invaded Kuwait. So that was like the very first.
The first Iraq War.
Yeah.
Because I stepped into the Navy in 1989 to 1992. So the story. Dusty, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Folks, that kind of ties into the interview that I'm going to do. My father wrote a book, and this is The America I Once Knew by Robert F. Bollinger that he wrote. And as my podcasts come forward, I guess of my father, he was a gymnastic coach. Many of you have known him from the 1970s, Trampoline Town, USA. Many of you a lot of his supporters and people that were part of the team are on Facebook now. Some, my brother Rob and I have gone, and that's, I guess, where I'm going to go with my show. My father published his book privately with many of his iconic people that he knew through Trampoline Town, but he never had an actual publisher for the book that went like, you know, on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. So he left to our family a lot of his writings, and his writings probably should have been published in the 1990s, in the year 2000, maybe still could. But I guess in my podcast, starting from this date moving forward, I'm going to share different parts of the book in remembrance to where my father left off, because I was the last one with my dad and took care of him back in the year 2000 to 2007, as I've moved forward now into my life to where I am today. The preface, and then I will continue. Dusty, I'm going to share this. In his autobiography, he says this to start. Like most autobiographies, this book is an attempt to describe one man's lifetime hopes and aspirations, both realized and unrealized, and his failures and successes in a variety of endeavors in which he has been involved for over 70 years. The author, that would be my father, Bob, seeks to provide this information in a historical context which covers the last 7 decades of the 20th century. The author has taken great pains to be objective whenever possible, particularly in his views concerning the chronology of history and its impact on American society in general as he perceives it. Like most autobiographies, however, a great amount of subjectivity also fills the pages of this book. Any personal story is almost bound to be subjective in this respect. And then he goes on into, how an autobiography starts. My point is not to, because if this book was meant to be published, and maybe it still could be, I don't know if heirs can publish past works. I don't know much about it, but I guess what I'm saying is I didn't know what to do moving forward, and I needed somebody to incentivize me to share some of the information that was left to me, left to my brother, left to other members of the family have access to this information. As a matter of fact, through travels, the original copy that I had to get from a good friend who would like this book back, because this book is not even mine. I have one, but pages, to be honest, came missing. But as I went back, I put information into the drawer, but this is stuff that I liked for my brother's kids and their kids and their kids and their kids to know. So we have that, and by putting together a podcast, I guess my dream is maybe to share some of the story along with my own story moving forward. Folks, I want you to know that this podcast isn't about, the fame or whatever the case may be. It's about friendship, dedication, and moving forward and sharing this story. So we're going to have that clear right now in my second year of podcasting as I move forward. Dusty, so what do you think of that preface? And like I say, he goes to tell his story because he was in the military on the entertainment stance. Your father was in Desert Storm. That was back in the 1990s. Did you get to hear any? Were you close to your father after Desert Storm? Did he come to you and the family? Were you close after that experience with him?
We kind of got close just before he left, but I think it was just one of those that he wanted to make sure that I knew he loved me in case anything tragic were to happen while he was gone.
Right.
It changed him a little bit. He was different when he got back. But obviously that's going to happen. Not to make light of Desert Storm, but he did 2 tours in Vietnam, so I think he knew what he was signing up for when he went out there.
Right.
So I would say the biggest change that I saw from him was more of a, he was a platoon leader, platoon sergeant, whatever. So when he would say something, he expected it to be done. Like there was no, it was almost like he didn't view me as his son anymore.
Right. No.
He viewed me as a private that was in his platoon, and when he told me to do something, he meant to do it right now. Right. So there was a little bit of a learning curve with that, and that didn't really last too long. He adjusted really well. Just after maybe about 6 months, he was kind of back to the same old.
Was there any post-traumatic stress disorder? Was he up close on the line? I mean, with the war?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or did you not get to that?
He didn't tell a whole lot of stories about stuff. Funny thing though, while he was gone, it was a Saturday morning. I was getting ready to head to bowling, and the phone rang, and so I picked up the phone and answered it real quick, and of course it was weird because back then, talking to somebody that far away on the phone, there's a huge delay. So by the time I would say hello, and he would hear me say hello, and then he could say, "Hey, it's Dad," and get back to me, it was almost like 20 seconds or something. It was nuts. It was insane. So I can't tell you how many times we actually hung up with my dad thinking nobody was on the other line, right? Because you're like, hello, and he's hanging up the phone.
Right, exactly.
And so he got good about it. As soon as he heard me or heard whoever pick up the phone, like he was like, "Hey, it's Dad, don't hang up." So it'd get to us as quick as possible. But that was actually my birthday. He called me that morning to tell me happy birthday, and I was like, "So where are you at right now?" He's like, "I can't tell you," and I was like, "You like on a super secret mission or something?" Horsing around with him. He's like, "No," he's like, "I don't know where the hell I'm at." He's like,
So he's in Iraq.
Yeah, he was somewhere in Iraq, and there was like a thing set up where there was like payphones or whatever right there in the middle of freaking nowhere. So he's like, I was like, "Oh, you can't tell me you're like on a secret mission?" Like, "No, I don't know where the hell I'm at." He's like, "There just happened to be a phone booth here next to the road, so I stopped to tell you happy birthday." So yeah, it was that was a rough experience for me because I was 14 years old, and that's a bad time to have your dad kind of be removed from your life, going through adolescence and things like that. I think I actually shaved my face for the first time while my dad was gone, and stuff like that. So the kind of things that you anticipate having a father there, when you hit a certain age in life, and to not having there for some of those father-son bonding moments, it was difficult, and to be quite honest, that experience actually changed the direction my life would go, because up to that point, there was absolutely, I was going into the military, like absolutely going into the military. And even when he first got back from there, but as I got a little bit older and a little bit older, by the time I was a senior in high school, I'm like, thinking about signing up and stuff. I'm like, you know what? Like, I remember watching my mom crying every night. I remember how I felt watching my dad leave. I was troubled in school because I was always worried about like what my dad was doing. Instead of doing my assignments, I'm writing him letters, stuff like that. It's like, I know at some point I'm going to have a family, and I don't ever want to put my family through that. So I went from absolute, I'm going into the military, to I'm absolutely not going into the military. And it's not that I don't have respect for it. I absolutely have 100% respect for our military and the people who serve, but my reality was, with my personal experience, and at the time of my life it all happened, it just redirected where I was going to go. My entire family's military family. His brother served, all his, his uncles, his cousins, and all
World
my
War
cousins.
II.
Oh yeah.
So you were military.
Yeah, Rhodes is a very strong military.
Yes,
family.
I know, and that's why I think this is. I think through a lot of thought, because I've given a lot of thought about how to move forward doing this, and I'm glad to have you on board, Dusty. I'm kind of going to call you my right-hand man moving forward in doing podcasts. We have a lot of ground to cover, and I hope this is a start. Interesting.
Believe me, I got a lot to say, and I love to hear myself talk, so this is working out perfectly.
No, exactly. But so Dusty, well, I really didn't know how to go because there's a lot of information. So you figure 12 shows, if we do one a month, it'll give viewers or people what maybe would they come up with. Back, and I'm glad to hear the story about your father. So from the military standpoint, so you're talking your grandfather, World War II, 1940s. Was it his father? Not now to speak, and then it's kind of your father. We'll kind of. So I guess the start of this is kind of a little bit about our fathers, because I think both of our fathers have made an impact on our life. My father's made an impact on many people's lives, and I kind of want to get perspective from two families, kind of a little bit, because there's so much to know that, and isn't it interesting how timing always works itself out, like meeting people, and your endeavors in life and events, and then you'll ponder back upon those moments and say, wow, now I get why maybe I met that person, or boy, they impacted my life great way. But it sounded like you impacted, and I didn't mean to start on a tragic note to the podcast, but it's interesting how I met you 3 months after, and how I can relate to the fact of, because another very close friend of 20 years, his mom passed away on his birthday. An experience that I don't. That's got to be a tough one. And then how interesting, because our first and second interview, this will be our third interview, started with COVID, kind of, and we started somewhere, and I kind of started last year because with Mayor Skip Lee of my community, and the first interviews I did starting my podcast was about COVID and what's going on. Well, let's hope. That's what I want to ask you, okay? Because I didn't know what to do with this interview tonight. Folks, this is not a scripted interview, because actually I sat and I tried to write down what I was going to do with Dusty tonight. I said, oh, this is going to hell in a handbasket. So we met and had a nice conversation, actually, for 3 hours before. We didn't even know if this podcast would get going tonight. So this is awesome, Dusty. Glad to know. And as I read my father's preface, he talks about a lot of the history from the Civil War, okay? we were talking about the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and I'm not going to get into that. Maybe some of this at another time. There's a lot of information, but as a matter of fact, speaking of, if you go into my first podcast, some of this that I wrote, I combined some of my current of last year when COVID hit to our country and what my father said. Looking backward, there was a time, and that's in last year. So that's I kind of didn't know how to start this, but now to take what my father wrote in his book and move forward. Hopefully, with some good information. I got a lot of good stuff moving forward. But Dusty, before we conclude this interview, it was about your father. It was about talking about losing your father. What I'd like to ask you now is about, as you move forward, what happened, and I know you lied reference to it, was it anything to do with your father, things growing up, to why you kind of have your stance, and you saw it in our last interview that we did. We were talking about COVID and some of the things, anarchy, or people that are against the main view politically. Why do you feel that you were kind of pushed under the rug as far as in social media? And I know we had the conversation earlier. We don't have to get into detail, just briefly. And that kind of goes into our last interview as we move forward. I wanted to get your take on that. I think that kind of sucks too, to be honest with you. Yeah, that is what's going on today. And that's been another hindrance of my wanting to move forward, but now I've made the decision tonight. It's up to them, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think we're writing history.
No, yeah, definitely. My parents, I can remember watching their evolution from Democrat to Republican as I got older. I think that's a pretty common cycle. I think a lot of people start out, when they're young, and idealists and things like that. The Democrat ticket seems very appealing, and then as you get older and you start looking at how much is taken out of your checks and the taxes and I won't get into that whole political philosophy.
Right. But he states that we'll talk about this at another time. So as we're talking, I'm going to take what he's already written and kind of, I not to interrupt you, but I have to interject, because exactly what you were just saying is kind of how I have to go about it, because there's so much information. So what you just said is something that he lays into, that as moving forward, like I started looking backward, there was a time, how he's telling the story about what we already talked about a few years later, what your father experienced in the first Iraq War, and that's right at our time of beginning. So continue right there.
Sure. So then, as I grow older, my political views have changed as well. There was a time when I was a Democrat, and then I was like, oh well, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm Republican, and I just really had the feelers out there. So I would say me going down the pathway of a libertarian / ANCAP / borderline anarchist. There's a term called minarchist, where you're like just kind of dabbling into the ideology of anarchy. But so many people don't really understand what the term anarchy just truly means, and when people hear anarchy, they think of just people running around throwing Molotov cocktails around and lawlessness and disorder. And
we already have been going. This is what happened last summer.
You can have that stuff with anyone, regardless of who's in charge. It's just the idea of the government leaving you alone and individualism, and taking care of each other. Like humans typically would just normally do, without interference of the government. I don't need the government. I'm a grown man. I don't need the government to tell me what.
So tyranny and Marxism. That's where you're leading.
Oh yeah.
Well, what's going on right now as we speak? Now, we were talking about COVID in the last interview last month. We talked about censorship and some of the things. If anybody wants to go, June 2nd, 2021, interview with Dusty Rhodes, part 2. And I'm not going to keep track of the interviews, but what I'm saying is there's just a lot of information. I guess this is going to be my baseline what my father gave me as I move forward to it, because this I put down, and I'm saying he wrote it for you, Tim. He was having these conversations with you, but it was different. Well, not really. So to say, was it any different? Well, what was different is there was a sort of there was the he said what you just said about the Democrat, and I'll pinpoint different interviews, because what I'm going to do is I read his preface. This was back, but they, like I say, you can go back to looking back where there was a time, and moving forward, because like I said, I did not have an agenda on how to do it, to do this, Dusty.
Sure.
Because I didn't want to sit and do this alone. And like you know, any kind of show, you usually have two, and then maybe three comes on down the road. And I did a couple other things with some other people, but that's what I'm saying. And what you told me about why you were banned. Okay, so and I haven't really brought that out. I think that stinks totally. Our interview went through the medium and stuff like that. So that's the big problem right now. That's kind of a big problem. That can be a hindrance or a stop to any dreamer or folks. That in itself, I think is a topic moving forward. Some of the other stuff that's going on, like there's the critical race. There's this. We're just still at the tail kind of end of the COVID thing from last month, and we're still not even with that, because the kids wearing masks. Another horrible thing. I don't know if I want to get on it tonight. I think I want to finish kind of where we were at our thing. But as you were saying, these values, your government leaving you alone. They're not leaving us alone.
Correct. It seems like every day you wake up and, you know, more and more legislation's either being introduced or passed that are just, you know, stripping away more and more rights. I guess we probably won't get too deep into it, but, you know, one of the things that's near and dear to me is gun control. You know, and every day I wake up and there's a new article about they're wanting to ban this, or they're wanting to ban that, or they're pushing this law, or they're pushing this law. And it's like, you know, and they politicize like all these tragedies, things that happen. It's like, you know, I get it, but, you know, there was a real solid reason. Like they only put so many things down on paper. Our founding fathers, they only put so many things down on paper that said, this is something that you absolutely, as a government, cannot mess with. You know, freedom of speech. Right behind that was
like right now. This is an invaluable human right. This goes, but see, here's the thing. Like Cuba now is in the news. We have Cuba in the news. These people are. We have Cuba in the news. Just reason. And I'm saying, so no sooner, not even just a part of our conversation, this little conversation in this small town, and we got all this nastiness going on out here. But to me, I think the topic to tackle, because it's like breaking down. We're going to stay on this subject of censorship and the freedom of speech. Okay, we talked about COVID in our last interview. We touched a little bit because we listened to our last interview. Folks, we listened to it before, and I actually screwed up and had to restart the podcast. He's like, you should have let it flow. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I said the wrong city. What did I say?
So you said we were in Sterling. We're in Rock Falls.
Okay, well, same town. Two towns could be one, but anyway. But at least I'm fessing up, folks, that I did that before. So it's like now I won't erase this because this is fine. But Dusty, on the point of the fact that our rights. Like you say, with gun control, but is guns the problem? What's going on? They're getting guns, whether people are following the rules, getting their gun card, going to the range and practicing. Most ordinary people, how do you think this is a problem? but it's been a problem.
Well, you know what's funny is the people that is actually going to hurt the most, like with introducing more and more legislation, they're talking about doing things like increasing taxes on guns and ammo so that they can use that to support state-funded groups to for like violence education, things like that. So the people that's going to hurt the most are the poor. I'm lucky enough that I've got a decent paying job or whatever, and if I want to go buy ammo, if it's well, the price is ridiculous right now, but even if it's $20 a case, I gotta go buy that. If it goes up to 25 because they put a $5 tax on it, I'm gonna go buy that. But you got people that don't have well-paying jobs that have the same right to protect themselves, right? Like just because they're poor doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to afford to protect themselves. So you're starting to price out poor people who happen to live. Poor people live in areas with higher crime rates. That's not
okay. Like in
you see what I'm saying?
Chicago, I understand. That.
So the
right to defend yourself,
the more
right
poverty,
to bear arms.
The more poverty-stricken area that you're living in, the higher the crime rate is, and the more need you're going to have to protect yourself.
Okay, but like anything, you get trained, like to drive a car. You learn to drive a car, you drive a car. Driving a car is the same as owning a gun. I don't see any real difference. You have a car can be a deadly weapon, and you drive responsibly. You go do according to the rules. You go and take your driver's test. The same with owning a firearm, except now felons, or if you have a little, say you did something wrong, or people with drug offenses have done stuff, and then they can't get firearms, or they never did nonviolence. That's a whole nother topic for another time. But what it gets down to the alienable rights, God-given rights, and the U.S. Constitution and what our country, and then you have the debates. After we shared each about my father, my view, and what you said about him serving, different time, different for them. They kind of set the stage for us, but what we're starting to see is stuff that they probably knew didn't seem really as prevalent to them like it is now. He talks about China. He talks about when Reagan and Gorbachev, the end of the 1980s and the decades, and I'll share some points in other podcasts. Moving forward about these things. But now we're in and I appreciate him. His book's coming out. As a matter of fact, I believe tomorrow. Mark Levin. Have you heard of Mark Levin? Life, Liberty, and Levin. He's a talk show host, great author. It's called The American Marxist. Is his book. I'm going to get it. It's on Amazon. Mark Levin, The American Marxist, and he talks about. And he's done all kinds of research and different things about Stalia and yeah, no problem. So, folks, we're going to take a quick intermission. I will be back with the second half of the interview with Dusty Rhodes. This is Today with Tim, taking a brief intermission break.